It was November 29th, 1935. Swami Yogananda with four others arrived at 8:45 a.m. He looks big but gentle and well groomed. He has dark flowing hair hanging over his shoulders. The group had lunch in the ashramam. Mr. C.R. Wright, his secretary, asked, "How shall I realize God?" Maharshi replied, "God is an unknown entity. Moreover, He is external, whereas the Self is always with you and it is you. Why do you leave out what is intimate and go in after what is external?" The devotee asked, "What is this Self again?" Maharshi replied, "The Self is known to everyone but not clearly. You always exist. The being is the Self. I am is the name of the God. Of all the definitions of God, none is indeed so well put as the biblical statement, 'I am that I am' in Exodus chapter 3. There are other statements such as Brahmaivaham, Aham Brahmasmi, Soham, but none is so direct as the name Jehovah, I am. The absolute being is what is. It is the Self. It is God. Knowing the Self, God is known. In fact, God is none other than the Self." The devotee asked, "Why are there good and evil?" Maharshi replied, "They are relative terms. There must be a subject to know the good and evil. The subject is the ego. Trace the source of the ego. It ends in the Self. The source of the ego is God. This definition of God is probably more concrete and better understood by you." Devotee: "So it is. How to get bliss?" Maharshi replied, "Bliss is not something to be got. On the other hand, you are always bliss. This desire is born to this because of the sense of incompleteness. To whom is this sense of incompleteness? Inquire. In deep sleep, you are blissful. Now you are not so. What has interposed between that bliss and this non-bliss? It is the ego. Seek its source and you will find that you are the bliss. There is nothing new to get. You have, on the other hand, to get rid of your ignorance, which makes you think you are other than bliss. For whom is this ignorance? It is to the ego. Trace the source of the ego. Then the ego is lost and the bliss remains over. It is eternal. You are that, here and now. This is a master key for solving all doubts. The doubt arises in the mind. The mind is born of the ego. The ego rises from the Self. Search the source of the ego and the Self is revealed. That alone remains. The universe is only expanded Self. It is not different from the Self." Devotee then asked, "What is the best way of living?" Maharshi, "It differs according as one is a gnani or agnani. A gnani does not find anything different or separate from the Self. All are in the Self. It is wrong to imagine that there is the world and then there is a body in it and that you dwell in that body. If the truth is known, the universe and what is beyond it will be found to be only in the Self. The outlook differs according to the sight of the person. The sight is from the eye. The eye must be located somewhere. If you are seeing with the gross eyes, you find others gross. If with subtle eyes, that is the mind, others appear subtle. If the I becomes the Self being infinite, the I is infinite. There is nothing else to see different from the Self." He thanked Maharshi. He was told that the best way of thanking is to remain always as the Self. Talk number 107. Later, Swami Yogananda asked, "How is the spiritual uplift of the people to be affected? What are the instructions to be given?" Maharshi replied, they differ according to the temperaments of the individuals and according to the spiritual ripeness of their minds. There cannot be an instruction en masse. Then the devotee asked, why does God permit suffering in the world? Should He not, with His omnipotence, do away with it at one stroke and ordain the universal realization of God? Suffering is the way of realization of God, said Maharshi. Then the devotee asked, should he not ordain differently? Maharshi, it is the way. Then the devotee asked, are yoga, religion, etc. antidotes to suffering? Maharshi replied, they help you to overcome suffering. Why should there be suffering? Asked the devotee. Maharshi replied, who suffers? What is suffering? No answer. Finally, the yogi rose up, prayed for Sri Bhagavan's blessing for his own work and expressed great regret for his hasty return. He looked very sincere and devoted and even emotional. End of talk 107.